So today's video is going to be more of like a casual, I guess, info dump rather than a more structured video, but I'll be discussing the issue of like labels in regards to autism, ADHD, and other neurological variations, neurodivergences that people have, because people are often opposed to neurodivergent labels, i.e., having them, sharing them, sharing them with their children who may have those neurodivergent labels, sharing them with family members, friends. It could take any number of things. It could take any varying level of stigma, but the common theme here is a opposition to or an avoidance of labels and a buying into or giving into the stigma surrounding these labels. And that stigma often is due to a lack of understanding or prejudice or whatever the case may be. Um, Now that we've laid down the groundwork, I'll tell you my labels. I'm ADHD and I have synesthesia, and I also consider myself to be a highly sensitive person, and I'm also hyperlexic. That's basically reverse dyslexia. Examples of being hyperlexic: I was reading a nutrition book when I was 3. So I learned to read really early, and I've always had a large vocabulary and a lot of like memory for words and stuff like that. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just trying to explain what hyperlexia is. Um, a lot of autistic people have it. Some estimates say as much of a third. But anyways, that's a separate topic. So on this topic, just because somebody has autism, has ADHD, doesn't mean they have a label or a diagnosis to go with it. So people go out into the world and they try to navigate the world, and other people, neurotypical people usually, they fear or view suspiciously what they don't know. And this is a human response, right? This is a human instinct, right? To fear or view suspiciously or react negatively to what one does not understand or what one does not know. You know, a lot of people might say that, okay, autism is in the minority, ADHD is in the minority. These conditions are not frequently understood. They're invisible minority conditions. They're just not understood. But I counter that by saying a label erases that. A label erases that. See, person doesn't know. If the person doesn't have a label, they don't know, and the autistic person is just acting the way they act, the ADHD person is just acting the way they act, okay, yes, then you're letting suspicion grow. You're letting fear grow. You're letting prejudice grow. You're letting negative reactions grow. But literally as soon as you've introduced a label, you've solved all those problems. Why? Because I can't speak for every single neurological condition that there is, right? But I can speak for autism. Let me tell you this, even those who have very little knowledge of autism or who don't properly understand autism, which I would argue is a large number of people in society, even those people, they already associate unusual behavior with autism. So let's say I walk into a room and nobody knows I'm autistic. And then somebody brings it up. Either I bring it up, I just casually in passing say it, or somebody else just casually in passing says it, and no one has any real conversation about it. Day moves on, life moves on. Okay? People will associate the behavior that they consider to be unusual with autism. Because even those who don't understand the concept of autism very well will understand that connection between behavior they consider unusual, strange, weird. Again, these are not the most respectful terms. I'm just thinking from their perspective. From their perspective, these are the words they might be using. They'll associate that to autism. And they'll be like, oh, that's just him being autistic. And if they're genuinely prejudiced or bigoted or whatever, then they might continue to get mad. But if they're a more forgiving, easygoing personality, or if they're, more I guess, open to different kinds of people, they'll be like, that's just him being autistic. See, it solves the problem. People already associate unusual behavior with autism. In fact, I was watching this one. My friend actually sent me this one reel on Instagram about some guy who tried to rizz a girl up through basically info dumping. And the caption read, "Bro's a lil acoustic." First, you shouldn't call autistic people acoustic because we're not acoustic, we're autistic. And you should not be making fun of other people's autistic traits. That's very disrespectful. Ladies, if an autistic guy info dumps towards you, he is just being himself, okay? It's not that deep. And it's not necessarily a romantic thing. It can be purely platonic. And I would also add to that, moving on from that, autistic behavior is quite distinct. You know, some people, I feel like they almost have this sort of sixth sense in a strange sort of way. They can tell when someone's on the spectrum. They can just tell, okay? And I'm not talking about autistic people. It makes sense, obviously, if you are autistic and you can tell if someone else is autistic. It makes sense because it makes sense if you can draw a subconscious connection between yourself and someone else who is also similar to you. And that's true of non-autistic people as well. But when it comes to unmasked autistic behavior, you really do not see non-autistic people acting like that. Not even our neurological siblings, those with ADHD. ADHD and autism overlap this much in terms of the people who have them and in terms of the traits of those conditions. Yet at the same time, you wouldn't find people with ADHD acting the way that autistic people do. You wouldn't find that. Autism is very distinct. Granted, you have to be a bit more educated on autistic behavior to determine exactly what that would look like, but it's fairly obvious that a person is autistic if you know what to look for. Because autistic behavior is fairly distinct. Non-autistic people really don't act like that anywhere in the world. Sure, maybe there's an overlap of like one or two different traits, but not as a whole, not as a complete package. Which leads me to my next thing. Speaking of wholes and complete packages, if-then statements. Autism, ADHD, dyslexia, all these conditions, high sensitivity, all the rest. These are not just labels, they are if-then statements. If a person is autistic, if a person is ADHD, it follows that then they will exhibit this, that, and the other. And I would say that, you know, some people might counter that saying, oh, if you've met one autistic person, you've only met one autistic person. I respond to that saying, okay, that may be true in terms of the outward presentation. That may be true in terms of how the person outwardly carries themselves, but I'm talking about in terms of the inside neurological processes. Did you know that all or nearly all autistic people are bottom-up thinkers, in that when they are trying to learn about or understand a new concept, they will pick the details before the concept rather than understand the concept before the details. They will piece the details together to form the concept in their heads, to recreate the concept model in their heads, rather than study the concept and then go into the details. This is true of practically every single person on the autism spectrum. But something on the outside. Not all autistic people flap their hands. But all autistic people think in the way that I just described, or nearly all. Now, in terms of like thinking patterns and things like that, internal neurological processes, understanding how the person thinks, well, that's nearly the same across the board. And there's even an autism. Okay, I gave that example, but autism is the widest of all these different spectrums, by far. It is the most wide spectrum there is, in pretty much any neurological condition. ADHD is not like that, even though more people have ADHD than have autism. High sensitivity, which I also have, is not like that, even though far more people have high sensitivity than both ADHD and autism combined. About 1 in 5 people would be described as a highly sensitive person. It's safe to say, if a person is highly sensitive, they will become overwhelmed with a high number of tasks in their routine or sudden changes in their routine, which are also true, by the way, of autistic people, just so you know. It is also true that highly sensitive people do not like being teased. It is also true that autistic people do not like being teased. By the way, and I'll make a separate video on this. I know there's a lot of overlap between high sensitivity and autism, but they're not the same. And these are just some examples of if-then statements. And some of these might have exceptions. I'll give you that. Some of these might have exceptions. But we can say that in those cases, if a person is autistic, if a person is ADHD, if a person is this, and if a person is that, then these other things will most likely be true. If a person is autistic, then most likely they will not like to be touched. For instance. Most likely. Yes, there are exceptions, but most likely that this is true. If a person is ADHD, then it is most likely that their interests will be varied and will change very rapidly. You get my point. And also, another thing is that, and this is very sad, the invalidation of, various autistic and ADHD experiences, people treating it as if it's not real, simply because that's not how they experience the world, invalidating autistic people, invalidating ADHD people because the way they experience the world, like, it's not loud, don't be so sensitive, or, telling us to not socially interact the way we naturally do, i.e. not info dump, to make more eye contact, to make more small talk, etc., etc. I say, okay. Or maybe the way we experience the world, like such as overwhelm from loud noises or overwhelm from many tasks. I say, okay. Maybe subjective reasoning is not enough. Sometimes making I statements is not enough. Using simply subjective reasoning is not enough. But then what do you turn to? Objective reasoning. Think about it. What's easier to counter-argue? A personal subjective opinion or an objective established scientific fact? I'll give you one incident. It didn't end very well, but it did happen to me. Like, I one time walked into a room. It was like a game room with a pool table and a foosball table and some board games, and there was this dude who was blasting music really loud. And I started with subjective reason. I said, "Can you turn down the music? It's loud." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, and then I asserted the objective scientific fact that was proven to be true when I was 6 years old. That was objectively, unequivocally, scientifically proven to be true and has not yet been disproven and most likely never will when I was 6 years old. Guess what? I said, I'm autistic. It's loud. Okay, that is an objective scientific fact that I just shared about myself. That is not just a me thing. Okay, it's true that society cannot adapt to one individual. It's true that the experiences of every individual is unique. It's true that individual people are very often misunderstood, especially when those individual people are different from the vast majority of humanity. But guess what? It's not an individual thing. It is a scientific neurological phenomenon that is going on. It attaches me to a group of people that is as old as humanity itself. It is a scientific neurological... It's a lot of reinforcement for my argument. It's a lot of reinforcement. The dude later denied my autism. He said, "You're not autistic." He literally said it to my face. I don't know how the hell that man came up with it, but he denied that I was autistic. I mean, real at this point, bro might as well have denied climate change, or denied that the moon landing is real, or denied that chlorophyll is what makes plants green. Of course chlorophyll is what makes plants green. Of course there was a landing on the moon that wasn't staged, as far as we know. Of course the Earth is round. We all know the Earth is round. It's so stupid to say the Earth is flat. It's so stupid to say chlorophyll is not what makes plants green and it's something else. You know? It's so stupid to say Earth is just 6,000 years old. People actually believe these things. Or that vaccines cause autism. Back to my original point about autism. These are scientific... Like, vaccines cause autism. That's a scientifically inaccurate statement. Earth is 6,000 years old. Scientifically inaccurate statement. If you're going to make one scientifically inaccurate statement, you might as well make all those other scientifically inaccurate statements that I just mentioned. Okay? And back to what I said about if-then statements. You have... So if I am autistic, then this is true. Okay? And then take it back to then if. You're going backwards a bit, but you still get my point. It's reinforcing that one individual trait that I spoke of. Okay? It's reinforced. So that other person who would have invalidated my autism now validates it. Or if they do invalidate it, then they really make an embarrassment of themselves, like this one man did. He humiliated himself. He said something that was just dumb and stupid and unintelligent. So it really does. So either the person, they get it, or they just humiliate themselves and embarrass themselves and give themselves a taste of their own medicine. Either way, it separates the good from the bad. And there's a reason why I'm elaborating on this objective reasoning and subjective reasoning. One of the main reasons which I masked my autism for so long, and that masking damaged me to a degree which is so deep and so profound, and just so... I don't know if I'll ever be able to 100% fully recover. It's taken a lot of work, and I've healed myself a great deal. I try to practice like yoga, meditation, hanging out with my friends, trying to stay calm, trying to stay healthy, eat healthy food, lift weights, drink lots of water. You know, try to show compassion to myself, show compassion to others. But the scars will remain there for the rest of my life. You know, one of the main reasons why I even began to mask to begin with was this invalidation of who I was. This invalidation of my lived experiences and people not taking it seriously. Or people ignoring or discounting it. Maybe acknowledging the fact that I was experiencing it, but not acknowledging that I was experiencing it the intensity that I said I was. And it just taught me. It's one of the lessons that life has taught me. For better or worse, it is the truth. When subjective reasoning doesn't work, turn to your friend objective reasoning. In conclusion, I'll say that it's 2025 now. There's so much information available about autism online, in terms of people who are diagnosed, in terms of people who have families that are diagnosed. We have no more excuses. We have zero excuses to talk about a lack of understanding. Or ADHD for that matter. ADHD is even better understood than autism, I'd argue. Just because there's more people with ADHD. High sensitivity. 1 in 5 people are highly sensitive. And as stigmatized as that trait is within society, it is extremely common and there are many resources about it. And all this stuff, it's not that people can't understand it, and it's not that people simply don't understand it. It's in 2005, 2025, the reason why people don't understand it is because they choose not to. They choose not to understand it. And that's why they don't. And honestly, if you really want to fight stigma around these labels, you can't contribute to it. What do I mean when I say contribute to stigma? Contributing to stigma means, oh, there's a stigma around autism and being autistic. Therefore, I'm not going to share my label. If you want to tear through the stigma, if you want to cut right through the stigma, okay? If that's what you really want to do, you just share it. Blast your autism, your ADHD, your high sensitivity, whatever the case is with your neurodivergence. Don't fear any stigma. Fear no stigma and just say your label. Eventually, that stigma is going to get scratched away. Stigma happens when people are silent about something, when people are collectively silent about something. If people are not collectively silent about it, that stigma doesn't exist anymore. Stigma exists only as long as everyone agrees for it to exist. As long as people don't say anything about it. That's the only way that stigma continues. When people start saying stuff about it, it stops existing. We have to understand these stigmas were created by people, and they are harmful to people. And we can overcome this. We can. If we truly want to, and if we truly desire to, we can. And we should, and we will. And so I hope that this video helped people understand the importance of labels and sharing the labels, whether it comes to autism, ADHD, high sensitivity, or any other form of neurodivergence. And thank you for watching this video.